Welcome to the Fractured Families podcast. I'm Charity, your dedicated parental alienation coach, here to guide and support families as they navigate the challenges of high conflict divorces and custody battles. On this podcast, we'll share insights, practical strategies, and hope for those on the journey toward healing and justice. Whether you're personally experiencing these challenges or just want to learn more about the complexities of parental alienation and custody disputes, you're in the right place. You are not alone. This is the Fractured Families podcast, where every voice matters and every story is heard. And if you find my conversation helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us reach more families who need it. Hi, thanks for joining the Fractured Families podcast. I have with me today Lauren. Lauren is sharing her story as a wife. Her husband and her are going through alienation from his past marriage. So Lauren's going to give us some insight as to what they've been dealing with as a couple, what the impact has been on her supporting her husband, and how this has affected her family and the child. So Lauren, thanks for joining the Fractured Families podcast. Why don't you set the stage for us? Tell us what's going on, how this started, and the current environment.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. It's refreshing to be able to tell this story. It's hard to talk about sometimes, so I really do appreciate the forum. I met my husband in 2018, and he was already going through alienation. He had not seen his son since April of 2018. He went away on a business trip, and when he came home to an empty house. His son had been taken. And when we met, it was months later. He was going through it. Both parties had filed for divorce, arguing their different sides and whatnot. But it wasn't. He briefly got to see him in November of that year. And allegations of abuse started from that one day. The judge granted him to be able to see his son. And she was trying to make up a story that he had hurt his arm. And it was really hard to watch her videoing this. Knowing this child was perfectly fine, and just watching that, that manipulation of this small child who was at that time 4. And then court went on until January of 2020. And that was the first time he was able to see and be granted access to his son. And the things, when we were able to have him in our home that first time, the things that were coming from this poor child who had been kept away from his loving father, who he clearly loved and missed. And you think about, like, children can sometimes have quick memories, and he held on to things and he wanted answers. This young child wanted answers because he remembered, I love my dad, I was with him, and then I wasn't, and I didn't get to see him for a really long time. My husband did the best he could to keep up with phone calls, but there was even interference with a lot of that. And so once we got him in the door, and we were able to hold him and hug him and love him, we thought, this is going to be it. This is great. But it didn't stop there. Immediately, they relocated to another state. Like the day that court finalized, he was told, oh, we're moving from Georgia to Texas. And all these plans that we had put in place, travel and whatnot, immediately had to change, and we had to shift. And we were like, what do we do? We made it work, because I told him, I support you. Most important thing is that we love him, and then we can be there for him and be consistent. And so we established that very early on, that consistency and being present for him. And that helped a lot for him, because there would appear to not be consistency on the other side. And then we went through a long custody battle in Texas, and immediately, shortly after that concluded, she moved again to another state and uprooted him in the middle of the school year. He did not know that he was going to be leaving, so he expressed concern about not being able to say goodbye to his friends. This life that he had started to establish in that community was just now again uprooted. And we went on vacation one time, and he asked me, is this our new home? Is this where we're going to be living now? And I said, baby, no.
They're little. They just don't understand.
Right. He didn't understand. And I think he was trying to brace himself. I see a lot of singular coping mechanisms where he's trying to stabilize himself, because it would appear that he's not having a stable environment or being provided appropriate coping mechanisms or the ability to even talk about his situation, what he's going through, because anything is met with, you're betraying me. That's a betrayal. Things that a young child, words that came out of his mouth that were not age
Mhm.
appropriate for him to have thought of himself. And so just watching him try to navigate through that it's been certainly a journey as a parent, as a stepmom, and we have our own children as well. So being both sides of that, like helping to protect your other children because they don't understand why their brother's not with them
Mhm.
all the time, or when they also get brought into some of these allegations from the other household is also difficult because what person in their right mind would start attacking a 5 or 6-year-old because they feel threatened? I mean, it's gone as far as like even our dog has gotten pulled into it. It's really interesting. I'm a very logical thinker, so from my perspective, it's difficult to watch and think, well, why would someone do this? Especially when you claim to love your child.
Right.
I could never. Again, that's from my perspective. I'm, try to look at things from everyone's side of the situation. I understand when you go through trauma and she grew up in a chaotic household and a lot of those things get mirrored. And I really do understand the science of generational
Right.
trauma and trying to break those cycles. I've witnessed it even in my own life. So I do try and have as much empathy as I can for her situation as well. But at some point, I feel like you're an adult. You have to either deal with what you've gone through or it's going to continue to damage your life going forward. And that's a choice as an adult that you're continuing to make by not healing. And now you're affecting others because you are unhealed, unhappy. And that's the part I struggle with is she's so angry that she's doesn't have this certain life. So she makes these false allegations against my husband. And it's like it's gotten to the point where there's no turning back. She's
Right.
made these allegations. She can't turn around and say, you
Yes.
know what? I'm so sorry I did that to you. But my husband and I have worked on that. And we've worked through that. And he doesn't need an apology to heal. I see him working every day to be a better man, to be a better father. And that tells me leaps and bounds of who he is. And he's been so strong through all of this. But there have been, times where I see him breaking down. I think that second Christmas away from his son was really hard and he just broke down in tears and all I could do was hold him,
Mhm.
and then, obviously that part of it's gotten better because we can hug him regularly now and talk to him, but the phone calls are still difficult because they put cameras all over their house and they make him leave his bedroom door open while he's talking to his dad. And even though it's written in the court order that those are supposed to be private conversations, they still get monitored and recorded. And we've come to terms with that because we know if we're not doing anything wrong, it doesn't matter. And someone can say whatever they want to say, doesn't make it true. And so we've kind of moved forward in that thinking. It doesn't feel good still to see him struggle, but we try and play video games or we pivot as much as we can to accommodate him so that he feels comfortable, relaxed, as happy as possible until he can get into a safe place where he feels comfortable. It's still difficult because he's still young and impressionable and he's not to that point where he can advocate for himself and say, I'm not okay with the manipulation and you have to accept that because he's still in a position where, it doesn't feel good to have your iPad taken away or to be told that you can't have certain things because you're not complying, right? And so I see that struggle within him over the phone calls. So even when we talk to him about his life here, baby, it's your life. You are allowed to talk about whatever you want to. And knowing that he's going back and being interrogated, we've just had to kind of let him figure out how he wants to lead his life
Mhm.
and how he wants to move through those conversations. And we've told him it's okay. We are okay with whatever you say. We obviously want him to be honest and be an honest person, but we also understand the difficult position that he's been put in as a child to please the other person. And we've accepted that sometimes that means we get thrown under the bus or something gets made up. And usually we figure these things out because it always comes later in some filing, or she likes to have these aha moments in court where she thinks we don't know whatever her accusation is going to be. And I told my husband, you know what? There's no aha moment. because when you live in the truth, it's
Yeah.
easy to answer a question very plainly. It's when you're having to scramble and cover up the story you're making or the lie that you're telling. That's when it's hard to get a straight answer. And that's when you know the difference between someone who sounds chaotic testifying in court and someone who sounds very put together and logical because you're living in that truth daily. And it's very easy to answer a question when you live there.
So how does she afford all this litigation? What is her situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've done a lot of research on the mindset of someone who displays the qualities that she
Yeah.
displays. And it seems that money is never really, even when they don't have it, they want to portray
Right.
that they do. And it's gotten to the point where she has filed for bankruptcy. She's gone through bankruptcy court. She does not work. I know that her current husband, her third husband now, he makes good money. So I think in some ways she's also probably taking the child support she gets. And these things to finance this, her parents do support their children. It seems like financially quite a bit between a lot of the legal stuff her brother has been through and her. I think she might be getting help from them. Don't know
Mhm.
exactly, but I know it's been a lot because obviously when you go to court, the attorneys have to testify to their fees, and she's spent substantially more than we have. Because I don't want to get into too much without betraying some people's trust, but we have been told that they didn't like working with
Mhm.
her, that she's, and I'm gonna church up the language a little bit so it's not so in the gutter, but it was like they've never seen someone so focused on destroying
Yeah.
another person's
Yeah.
life. And I feel like that must have been very difficult for that person to have confided in us because they were in a situation where, they can't talk to us too much about things. But it was a little bit justifying to hear them say that because sometimes you feel like you question yourself a lot. Like, are you the crazy one?
Mhm.
Does nobody else see what this person's doing? Her attorney this last time did ask my husband, so she's manipulating all of these people? And I was really proud of he did an amazing job, but he said yes. And I think she was trying, well, the therapist wrote you a letter last year. You didn't respond to it. My husband said no. Well, why not? And my husband said, I've learned not to engage in that kind of behavior. It just creates like a back and forth that, and she said, well, don't you want people to know your side of the story? He said, that's what this forum is for. This is where I can get those things out.
Yeah.
And I was really proud of him because early on there was that back and forth. He did
Mhm.
want to say, no, I didn't
Mhm.
do these things. No, that's not how it happened. And he realized it was an effort and futility is really was not um, value added. And at the end of the day, I told him, God knows, us coming from a religious perspective, that, God, it's between you and God. He knows what really happened in that situation on that day, what's really going on. And if you can sit right with it in your soul and in your person, that's all that matters. It's going to be hard because a lot of people could be looking at you sometimes like you're a bad
Mhm.
person. But you have to realize, does that really matter to you when you know you didn't do anything wrong? And I think he was able to answer that for himself that, no, I'm good. And I did that for myself as well. Like, am I okay with that for him?
Yeah.
If he's okay with it, I have to be okay with it. Same thing with my son. If he's okay living in chaos and not ready to stand up for himself, I have to be okay with that too. Everybody has their breaking point. Everybody finds their voice at some point. Well, you would hope. And I pray for him that he finds his voice someday and he's able to stand up for himself. And I also pray that she accepts that, that she finds that point where, what, maybe you're right. Maybe this is that time where I'm not going to get defensive and I'm going to accept this criticism and I'm going to change. But I only hope that for others,
Mhm.
can't do anything about it.
So what's it like for him? So let's talk about the visitation or parenting time
Sure.
schedule. What does that look like now?
Yeah, so right now it's any weekend of the month of our choosing, which we primarily choose if there's a long weekend, we go for that. And we were able to get from the judge in Texas the entire time. So not just like sometimes it's a Thursday to a Monday, or we get from the time that school releases until the night before school resumes. Then it's every spring break, and then alternating holidays, they split the Christmas, winter break. So it's a lot more time, which is great. It's still not always easy because sometimes there will be several weeks and there's only like a short weekend in there. Summer is great because we get a long time during the summer. And that seems to be a time where he really gets to relax and be himself. And it's beautiful to see him in his element, being himself. But it definitely is a lot more time than originally what he had gotten out of Atlanta, out of Georgia. But it would be nice to have more.
So what is the transition like for him? Does he struggle initially?
It's a great question. So in the beginning, it was very difficult. And I think early on, when he was really opening up about things, Joel tried to have that conversation with her. It did not go well. And we learned early on, anything that we share with her will be used to punish our son. So we chose to kind of bite the bullet on that one, so to speak, and just be the safe space for him. When he would first get here, it would take about a day for him to really like relax. And then when he found out he was going back in the beginning, he would get very angry and kind of trying to put up that wall. And I think trying to push us away. He wanted us to almost reject him, and we wouldn't. And when he learned that we weren't going to ever do that and we were going to always love him, we would tell him when he was really little, it's okay, you'll be back. And then we'd give him a time frame. And he actually started taking that and using it with his siblings, saying, it's okay. I think he was saying it out loud, to kind of reinforce it within himself. It's okay, I'll be back. And once he realized that was the truth, it really helped. Then there was, when we were going through court in Texas, then there was the high anxiety, throwing up on the airplane going back the night before sometimes was, especially if they had a bad phone call. He would come out of the room crying and not getting too into what he would share. But I remember one time was really hard, and it was a night full of him sitting in the bathroom floor in my arms, between me and his dad, just throwing up because he had so much anxiety. And he was just here for spring break recently, and he's gotten better with all of that, I will say, but I still see a change in him that like last day, if he knows he's leaving, he gets quiet now. He gets really quiet and very reflective. I think he's starting to do that, as we all do, that weighing, what am I going to miss about one house? And I don't want to say this because I don't want to put words in his mouth, but there's almost this I wish or what if kind of mentality. Like, what if I lived here, full time? What would my life be like? Would it be like this all the time? And that's really hard to watch him internalize those things. And I never force him to talk. I always say, hey, I can see something's on your mind. If you want to open up, I'm always here. And, I think he knows that it could potentially get him in trouble. So he sometimes will decline. And I tell him that that's okay, but I'm always here. And then we just leave it at that. All I can do, like I said earlier, is just be consistent with that, be there for him, be consistent, understanding, and let him know that no matter what, I always love him, that his dad and I always love him. And he knows that, he knows that we love him when we say it, and he doesn't say it even like when he's on the phone there. He's not allowed to say it back. And that's okay, because we tell him, I love yous are for us. If you want to say it, the I love you, when you say it, is for you. So if you ever say it and someone doesn't say it to you, that's okay too, because you're telling them how you feel, So sometimes him not saying it back, we let him know that's okay, because that was for you to know that we love you, and just leave it at that.
So I'm circling back to, he comes home and everything's gone. I mean, horrible.
Yeah.
And then you meet him. Does he think, or do you think that triggered, or does he believe there was something there that he expects now that he knows what it is? He expected that, or he just didn't see it?
Her leaving? Is that what you're asking
Her
about?
behavior, her alienating tactics.
My sweet husband, I don't think thought there was a person like this on earth. He got into a relationship. They had been coworkers. I think he thought, I get along with everybody, so I can make this relationship work. And I can naively say I've been there before too. Like, I've been in a relationship where I was like, I can get along with everybody, so I think I can make this work. And you learn going through it, it takes two people. You cannot do it alone. And if the other person's actively even sabotaging it, whether they intend to or not, simply through toxic habits, you can't make a relationship work on your own. And you certainly can't do it when the person you're in the relationship with is fighting against you. And I don't think he could have ever won that situation. I'm not sure anyone can ever win that situation with her. And so I don't think he thought this was ever going to happen to him. No, I don't.
So, at what point did you two realize it was parental alienation, and how did you figure that out?
So to give it a word early on, I'm very, again, I'm neurodivergent. So I'm very like, uh, finding a definition for something, right? Giving it a term. And early on, I can say this is very alienating behavior. This feels intentional. This doesn't feel like someone who's just acting like the emotional intelligence of a 5-year-old who's like, I want to make your life terrible because, I can't have the life with you that I feel like I deserve. And so then I started doing a lot of reading. I read Amy Baker's books and started there. I actually had a friend who was kind of going through a situation. I was just talking to her about it, and she said, here's some books. I'll start reading this. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like exactly. We actually had some meetings with her just to kind of discuss like this is what we think's going on. How can we kind of navigate through this? We need some coaching, some pointers so that we can protect our own sanity, but we can help our son too kind of navigate this waters from this side of it because we can only control what's going on in our household. And so that I would say I figured it out kind of early on that something was up. This is not right because I have a child of from a previous relationship myself. And I just looked at it from the perspective of I would never. In fact, I always encouraged that relationship. We actually, when we were not together anymore, we lived together so we could raise our child together because I wanted her to grow up with both parents in her life and having those wonderful relationships. I'm really close to my dad, and he was from a broken home, and I knew how that affected him. And I kind of said, I never want that for my child. And so just kind of going from a healthy side of things, seeing like this is not okay or normal or right, and then delving into it from that perspective and kind of doing the research and learning about parental alienation and what it entails and starting to go through that mental checklist and checking off all those boxes and going, yeah, this is not good. This is what this is. Yeah.
So, her new relationship, what roles does he play in potentially either fueling this behavior, but definitely supporting it, or maybe he's blind to it as well?
It's a great question because I ask myself that a lot. Going through all of this, also have done a lot more research on my own neurodivergence and trying to understand why people put up with these kinds of behaviors for so long and learning that, we as neurodivergents can be exceptionally empathetic and understanding, but we also have a very hard line in the ground that it's like once you get there, we not turn off the empathy, but turn off your access to us. And I am very much operate that way. And I've learned that that's not the normal. That's not how neurotypicals function. And they will allow sometimes someone to push and push and push and push. And so all I can think is that he plays the victim card very well. And I think he wanted to be her rescuer, her savior. And he was already in it by the time I think maybe he started seeing some things that were concerning to him. They had a child together before my husband's divorce from her finalized. And so once that was over, I think their idea was now we can move on with our lives. But I think he was like, well, now I'm seeing some things that I'm like, wish I had seen earlier because they weren't living together either. He was in Texas and she was in Georgia. So once they were living in the same household and he was seeing some things firsthand, um, you know, it was interesting because you can hear in the background the arguing or the yelling or, our son got into the car one time and he started crying and he said, that they had gotten into an argument and that the new husband had left and he was worried that he was going to lose another dad. Yeah. And my husband consoled him as much as he could and just told him whatever happens between adults, it's not your fault.
Yeah.
And it's not his responsibility basically to shoulder that burden. He does come he's been to a couple of the hearings, so I've seen him there. But from that authentic, it's easy to be honest when it's authentic, right? And I see them, they don't, and it's hard to say. A lot of people have successful relationships and they're never affectionate and they're never cuddly and lovey. And that's not the gauge of whether or not your marriage is working, but they're not. And it's forced when it's clearly for an audience when they are, and it's almost so awkward to watch. And I almost feel like, if you're really not in love with each other, but you're staying in the marriage for your kids, then just own that, live in that and just, be those people. But it's not my marriage and it's not my place. So don't worry about it. And when he finds his breaking point, and if he chooses to leave or she pushes him away or whatever their situation is, then, we'll have to deal with it from a perspective of our son. And other than that, it's not my marriage. It's not really my concern outside of that.
So it sounds like there's been a lot of litigation other than the first initial time, year and a half or so that he was away from his son. It sounds like you've had a lot of success. Has her bouncing around created any doubt for the courts?
It's a great question. It's hard to say because it's moved from several courts.
Yeah.
So it started here in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was at the same time being litigated in Georgia. Now, the judge we were in front of recently was the same judge that litigated their divorce. It does seem to finally be making an impact. We just got a ruling recently, and there was some verbiage in there about vexatious, frivolous type of lawsuits, and basically the court's eye is on this situation. Yeah. And that's what I thought too. And there were some positive things that came out of the Texas litigation as well. It was very long though. It was a very long process. And that was the hard thing in the beginning of that, because they are set up a little bit differently. They kind of give you the lay of the land day one. And so, going in how long it's going to take. So we're looking at this paperwork on initial filing and we're like 3 years. And then 3 years later, it was like, wow, how did that go by so fast? It was crazy, but even then, when the final trial happened in June of 2023, she would not sign the documentation. So we had to go back 2 more times until November of 2023 when we finally got a final order. And the judge said, I don't need anybody to sign it. It's for me to sign. I'm putting this into effect now. It's been an eye-opening experience. I had no experience with the legal system prior to this other than friends being lawyers, and they weren't even really dealing with family court stuff. They deal with other things. And I can only say that coming from a very logical thinker perspective, I analyze everything. So I look at it now as a life experience. And then each time we have to go back, like this last time, my husband and I went and we looked at it as it was time alone for he and I, without the kids. And we went and had dinner and, had a nice time and tried to find it around these ways. Because again, if you're doing the right thing and you live in the truth, it makes that process really easy. It's still not stressful, but having gone through it a few times now, it does get less stressful. And, you brought up something that I want to kind of hone in on for a minute, and that's we do have more time with him. I know there's a lot of parents out there that the time away from their child is a lot longer.
Yeah.
And the hurdles that they have to overcome are greater than even what we are going through. All I can say is don't give up hope. I read every day about parents who end their lives because of what they're going through. Just don't give up hope. Even if it's not until they're 18 or 19 or 20, our brains are still developing. We're still growing. I did so many stupid things as a kid, and I was a good kid, but we all do stupid things. And it takes us a long time to really look back on our lives and, hey, maybe that wasn't right what my mom or dad was doing. And I should really hear things from the other person's perspective and make my own decision. And it can take a long time sometimes. But, if you're going through it, just don't give up.
And you make a really good point, because one other thing that needs to be considered, and you're immersed in this, so you understand this, is the children that are alienated, they're victims as well. So a normal child's mental capacity at 8, 10, 12, 13 is going to be different for a child who's in a psychologically abused environment. Their fear they're more responsive, they're more sensitive, they know the consequences are severe for defying the alienating parent.
Yes.
So, you and I as a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old in a healthy, normal household,
Right.
right? It's going to be different than a child who's being used as a pawn in a game from the
Yeah.
alienating parent. And the reason why you see him shut down or not say I love you is because there is this sense of constant, who else am I going to lose? Which is why he was afraid of his
Yes.
stepdad leaving, right? Because
Yes.
he lives it. He knows it probably more than anybody what the consequences are. And so that's
Yeah.
so traumatizing. And your husband's approach to this is so impeccable. And it's so hard to be impeccable because when your child's heart's being ripped out, your heart's being ripped out. And you don't
Yes.
think clearly. You don't act normally. I just saw something on Facebook where a father drove into a police
Oh,
station. You
yes.
saw that,
I
right?
saw
And he's
Yeah.
just desperate, and that clearly is not gonna create the outcome he wants,
Right.
but your heart and your mind, they don't know how to calibrate and emotionally react in a way that the judges see. And I think
Right.
based off what I'm hearing in your case and in your husband's case is the behavior represents the security of that household.
Mhm.
But it's hard. It's hard to be that controlled, especially when you see
Mhm.
your child being emotionally torn apart.
Yeah, you're so right. And again, I just go back to it's been a learning lesson. We did not always do everything right in the beginning. Like I said, we engaged in that back and forth trying to say, "Hey, no, that's not what's going on here."
Mhm.
And then we realized, "No, that's her supply. That's what
Mhm.
she wants. So why would we give her that?" And it all it does is affect our peace of mind
Yep.
here. And if we can protect our peace here, not engage with that, do our best to love, support, create a stable environment, all those things here in our home, we can reach into their home through our son.
Right.
And in a small way, we did. And I told my husband that, when it took 3 years to get through court in Texas, that forced her to stay in Texas for 3 years.
Mhm.
She had to play the game and say, "Oh, look at my perfect household here, and we're going to stay here forever." And which was so ironic, our attorney had asked her that, like, "Are you planning on staying, in Texas?" "Oh, yeah, we're going to stay here forever. We love it. We don't plan on moving anytime soon." And 6 months later, a year later, and I told my husband, "You provided stability
Yeah.
in their home just by this act." It wasn't
Mhm.
like that was the
Yeah.
intention, but it
Mhm.
ended up being the side effect of it. And he was able to grow up in between our house and their house, the
Mhm.
same house, for those 3.5 years. And that's that's something, because now he's a little bit older and he is starting to get a picture of things and
Mhm.
see things and understand how good it felt to have something he could call his own room, his own
Yeah.
space. To lose that right now, it's obviously having an effect on him, but I see it here. He feels very settled right away. This is my room. I'm going to go play. I'm going to play with my toys. I'm play with my sisters. Going to have dinner in my home. And
Yeah.
so we are still able to provide stability for him. And that feels really good.
So as we close out, I have another question. You
Sure.
sound like you're both doing all the right things. But
Hope so.
at the end of the day, you're dealing with somebody who deliberately works against doing all the right
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
So you're both trying to be as level-headed as possible. But how do you feel like you're walking on eggshells because you just never know what's coming next?
Yeah, so in the beginning, I did. In the beginning, I very much did. Like, especially with some of the things she's done,
Yeah.
you always feel like you're being watched or
Yeah.
monitored. Or then I realized it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. First of all, so much of that when it comes to the courts isn't even admissible. It's not, an email that she wants to make up and just crop part of it out so she
Mhm.
can just see part of a
Mhm.
conversation is not going to ever do anything. She would file false police reports against my husband, against me, and she would mention it, but it was nothing because, at the end of the day, you have two people, at least we have two people that we don't have records outside of, and certainly no accusations against us outside of what she's
Yeah.
tried to put out there. Um, We've been employed this whole time. We contribute, we volunteer, to spend time at our church. Our neighbors know us. We just go and live our lives. But yes, in the beginning, I very much was, because I feel like you have to be perfect. If I'm not perfect, then there's room for, I always tell my husband, if you give a mouse a cookie, if you have that one crumb out there, they're going to latch onto it. And she does. She'll try and find or make that one crumb, and then she will latch onto it and go forever with it. But you start to realize, and I know this is not everyone's situation, but sitting in that courtroom, they can read between the lines a lot of the time. And we've been lucky enough to have the situation where they're clearly not only reading between the lines, but also communicating back with us between those lines. Like, here, I got to give them a little bit, but I'm going to give you this thing over here. So it's hard when like even an inch is given towards that false accusation or allegation, but then you realize what you're getting in return. And you're like, okay, I can suck it up. And also we still know the truth. So what does it really matter?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so what's she going to do? She's going to go tell the school, because she'll badmouth them to the school. She'll badmouth them to her new husband's family and her family. And okay, that's gossip. What does that really do? It doesn't do anything to us, not to our peace and our home. She says things to our son, sure, but he knows because he lives here. He knows the truth. So I think we just live in that. And for us, it's a lot of praying too. And we have a really good support system.
Yeah.
My parents live nearby, his sister and his parents live nearby. And we really do rely on that support system to kind of get us through those harder times.
Great. Well, Lauren, thank you. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
I'm just going to go back to that, don't give up hope, even when you feel like your child's starting to turn against you.
Yeah.
That's the hardest one. And don't blame them. I would
Yep.
say this because there's times where you want to confront
Yeah.
them and be like, why did you do this?
Yeah.
You know what? They're doing it out of survival. Don't blame them. Kind of hold on to that and refocus that energy somewhere positive by giving them an extra hug or a kiss goodnight or an I love you, or just going and doing something fun that they love. And some people might say, oh, why are you rewarding bad behavior? You're not. You're saving a child from a really, really bad situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Lauren, thank you for joining the Fractured Families podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Fractured Families podcast. I hope our conversation has provided you with support, understanding, and actionable insights to help you navigate your own family challenges. Remember, healing is a journey, and reaching out for help is a sign of strength. You're not alone. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your support helps us reach more families in need. You can contact me on social media at Parental Alienation is Real, and visit our website for additional resources and ways to get involved. Stay strong, stay connected, and keep fighting for the family bonds that matter most. Until next time, take care and stay resilient.